Mitch McConnell has said that he supports the framework of this anemic gun bill. It is unclear to me whether he's actually just teeing it up to fail in the Senate. And, I
don't think so, though.
I don't think so either, because this thing is so anemic. And
McConnell understands when he has a win in front of him, and the Republicans want to be able to say, well, we did a little bit of something, which is actually just window dressing, because he recognizes there's a tension right now.
Or I would say there's also an alternate theory that he realizes he has a loss, and so he's going to be on the winning side of this. Like we mentioned the other day, half the people who signed up out of the 10 Republicans, 4 of them are retiring. And the other 5 who signed up were just elected 16 months ago, so they don't have to face their voters again for another almost 4.5 years. And then there was Mitt Romney, who this
is his political brand. So,
exactly.
I mean, frankly, he would be voting for this regardless.
And so it could be McConnell just thinks like, okay, well, I might as well be on the winning side of this. Because make it seem like the Republican Party is with this, as opposed to only people who are basically out the door or have just got reelected.
Which is why I'm becoming convinced that progressive Democrats should block this.
Block it by requiring more. Remember, the House passed a bill that was far more vigorous, so they still have to meet in conference. And the idea is, have the House negotiators hold out, have the bill go back to the Senate, and watch those 10 Republicans flee, essentially. But let's play this clip number 9. This is from Newsmax, and it is with Missouri Senate candidate Mark McCloskey, who has, incidentally, this is that couple that came out of their house when they heard that BLM was there with semi-automatic rifles.
Went out in their balcony with AR-15.
I think they went out in the grass in the front lawn.
Brandished it at them.
And they're being asked what should be done to protect schools from gun violence.
And, of course, now after the, tragic shooting in Uvalde, there's discussion of how do we protect our schools? Should teachers be armed? Should there be police officers at schools, armed guards, what have you? And on Monday, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, he signed legislation that would allow school employees to carry guns after just 24 hours of training. Mark, you're running for U.S. Senate. It's in your home state of Missouri. If you become a senator, what action would you take to protect the Second Amendment?
Well, I think the Second Amendment, it says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Shall is a command word. It's not optional. I
pause it for 1 second. Is the word people in the Second Amendment? I don't think so. It's the right of the people to maintain a well-regulated militia. Whatever. I mean,
it's not a command word, Sam.
All right, continue. Sorry.
Mark, you're running for U.S. Senate. It's in your home state of Missouri. If you become a senator, what action would you take to protect the Second Amendment?
Sorry, but I legit thought she was going to ask, protect kids, but also save gun rights.
Well, I think the Second Amendment, it says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Shall is a command word. It's not optional. I am torn because you have to protect the kids. But turning schools into prisons is not a good option either. What we need to do is get away from this culture of lawlessness, this culture of death, this society where there's no common decency, there's no common morality. When we were kids, no one thought about going in and shooting up a school because we were all going in the same direction. We had common principles, and now moral relativism for the last 70 years has torn us all apart. So that people just, everybody has a cell phone, and the more antisocial you can be, the more disruptive you can be.
I'll pause it for a second. Now, I should just say the word "people" is in the Second Amendment, and but it is qualified.
They leave out the first half of the sentence.
Exactly. Yeah. Qualified by the need of a well-regulated militia. But I'm trying to think. 70 years ago, what was it that started this moral relativism that started happening 70 years ago? Like 1950? That's when we started getting moral relativism? Like leading up to what? Like what was going on like in the 50s, late 50s and early 60s?
Yeah, it's like we do civil rights and then August 1st, 1966, the University of Texas tower shooting happens immediately just because of
all the moral relativism and the culture of death. Yeah.
Things become more relative when the color complexion of the general population that this guy has to worry about changes.
Perhaps the gender, too.
When the bell tower shooting happened in Austin and 14 people died, did they blame it on like radios, I wonder? Like it's all these radios causing these people to do
There's a lot of radio.
It's modernity.
When you get on Facebook, and that's part of the whole crisis. What we have to do is develop a new attitude where kids are brought up with good, wholesome Christian values, and they think they have an intrinsic sense of what's right and wrong rather than moral relativism. And that'll do more for saving kids than all the guns and all the locked doors in the world.
Those kids that died had moral relativism.
They died of moral relativism.
Yeah. You know, Christ is definitely in favor of violent threats with guns. Those are the kinds of values that were imbued in his upbringing.
The enormous increase in the number of guns in this country had nothing to do with it. It was just simply the moral relativism that started in 1950.
When anybody makes a cultural critique that about violence in this country, all you just need to do is copy and paste values and culture with too many black people. That's what they're talking about.
Well, I will say this, there was and I haven't seen the actual tweet, but I heard that some filmmakers from Hollywood, I think it was like Judd Apatow and Adam McKay and I don't know, Jimmy Kimmel and Mark Ruffalo, all of whom I have varying different opinions about their politics and their value to, a better society. But they committed to not having gun violence in their movies. And aside from the fact that, as far as I know, none of them really do any movies with any gun violence. I guess, that's also a way maybe of Ruffalo just to say, like, I'm done with the MCU. That's good. I don't have to deal with that anymore. I don't know. But aside from that, I have no doubt they feel like they are making a symbolic gesture that is helpful. And I would say, no, actually, you're making the absolutely wrong symbolic gesture. The problem with gun violence in this country is not a function of video games or our movie culture. Every one of those movies that are made with gun violence in this country, everyone, are made because they know, the filmmakers know, the producers know, the studios know, they can sell it overseas over and over again. Those action movies are the ones that travel the most around the world. So it's not like our culture is unique in gun violence movies. Our culture is unique in that there is such easy access to weapons that make it much easier to kill people. Like weapons like this one. This guy is just showing.
This is the guy they just asked about keeping kids and guns safe.
Yeah.
The pink Brooks Brothers polo is just really adds to it. And I love that it speaks to his tenuous grip on his manhood there, that he carries the big AR-15 and his wife has like a mini pistol that she can
a little Beretta or something
fit in her pocketbook, right? Because that's appropriate for a lady.
There you go.
It's classy.
Yeah.
I get the big one.
But the point is, obviously, it's not our culture. There's many problems with our culture, without a doubt. People can argue as to what those problems are. But regardless, the low-hanging fruit is don't allow for such easy access for weapons that can so easily kill multiple people. I mean, that's just it. And intimidate law enforcement, for that matter. There's been a couple of studies over the past 2 months that have come out that are really relevant at this point. One study that was recently published in the Annals of Internal Medicine examines the question of how helpful is it to have a gun in the home in terms of protecting people in the home, not just the gun owner, but people in the home. They studied 18 million adults living in California. 2,300 of them died by homicide over the 12-year study. And apparently California has a very extensive archive of firearm transactions. So they could identify that population out of those 18 million people who personally owned guns. And, this is important, who lived with gun owners. Right? I buy a gun, I license it to me, and then I have my partner and my kids maybe living in the house. The goal of the study was to see whether homicides were more or less likely to occur in homes with handguns. And apparently, there have been studies like this in the past, all of them finding higher homicide rates in homes with guns. But this study had 3 novel features. This is according to one of the lead researchers, a guy named David Studert. First, he writes in Time, rather than calculating risks to the household as a whole, as the prior research has done, we focused on household members who lived with handgun owners but weren't themselves owners. In other words, the secondhand risk. What is the danger to you if you are living with someone who owns a gun? And apparently there's very little that's known about this type of risk. It just measures like, what are the chances of you as a gun owner of dying? Second, their study was many times larger than previous studies of the relationship between gun access and homicide risk. So they could look at particular kinds of homicides, those occurring in or around the home, and at those at the hands of family members, measuring the dangers and the protective benefits of gun access by examining deaths at the home makes sense, because that is where most guns are kept most of the time. It's also where the plurality of homicides occur. And lastly, when they measured the homicide risk, they compared people who were living with handgun owners to people who were not. And the comparisons were always made between people residing in the same neighborhood. In other words, you're controlling for any outside contexts like socioeconomic status, local crime rates, local economic conditions, et cetera, et cetera. None of that was a variable in this instance, or a minimal variable. So this is what they found. People living with handgun owners died by homicide at twice the rate of their neighbors in gun-free homes. Same neighborhood, across the street, whatever it was, twice as likely. So in other words, your home is a hard target, and the people living with you in that hard target die by homicide twice the rate of their neighbors. That doesn't mean, and that includes burglars coming in or home invaders, whatever fantasy notion you have as a gun owner as to what the threats are. It turns out the threat is the gun.
Matt's talked about this all the time, about how in the United States we're taught to only feel empowered in our consumption, empowered as consumers. And there's something like very sad about the mythology of protecting your family from a home invasion, and then obviously the statistics bearing out that it's more dangerous to have the gun than in any perceived threat. Because like the threat is our system that kills us. It's our completely morally bankrupt, cruel system that people die at insane rates of not having health care. And the violence is within the home as opposed to the outside threat, which we're conditioned to perceive as opposed to, like, I don't know, the system.
If you're having trouble conceptualizing this, I don't know if most people are, but there's an easier way to do it. Think of it this way. Homes where someone has laid booby traps for outside, invaders, right? Like, oh, I've set up a booby trap here where if this tripwire is, it's going to blow up. is it easier for you to understand the concept then when you realize like, oh, okay, yes, the likelihood of people dying in that home is twice as high because they're booby trapped. And essentially that's what a gun is. It's a booby trap. On top of that, people living with handgun owners were 7 times more likely to be shot by their spouse or intimate partner. So not only does it not make you safer, not only does it make you twice as likely to die by homicide, it also means that you're 7 times more likely to die because of violence between you and your partner, regardless of who owns the gun. You both had access to it. And should be of no surprise, the vast majority of victims in those partner shootings, 84% were female. And, part of that is most people who live with gun owners and don't themselves own guns are women.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to check, like, if you just dropped in a generic instance of, or a random instance of gun violence in America, it's probably the situation where someone who's financially dependent on somebody who's also menacing them or threatening them with a gun regularly.
Homicides perpetrated by strangers, right? Homicides of this kind, according to the one of the researchers, were relatively uncommon in their study population. Much less common than deaths perpetrated by the victim's partner, family members, or friends. But when they happened, because they do happen, we've all seen the movies. I mean, obviously it happens in real life. People living with gun owners did not experience them less often than people in gun-free homes. In other words, even if you control for just looking at the question of what happens when those people do the home invasion or whatever it is, having a gun owner in the house and a gun in the house does not provide any protection.
It reminds me just really briefly of the Republican groomer talking point about teachers and being groomed outside the home, where sexual abuse most often happens with a family member and somebody that the child knows.
Just want to read this one sentence. We did not detect even a hint of such protective benefits. Not even a hint against what ostensibly everyone who owns a gun in their home says is why it's there. Totally disregarding the booby trap quality of it, that it's more likely to end up doubling the chances of someone in that house dying by homicide. And the other thing that I would imagine is, I don't even know if this is calculating accidental deaths.
Suicides, does it count that either?
Well, there was a second study by the same team, which was published in the Journal of American Medicine Psychiatry on April 29th. And it switched the focus of secondhand risks to suicide in a large sample of women living with handgun owners in California. Women living with handgun owners in California, and again, the vast majority of handgun owners are men, were 50% more likely to die by suicide than their female neighbors in gun-free homes. Now, it's possible that there's some dynamic where men who buy guns and the women who live with them are more depressed and more suicidal. That's possible, which is a totally another reason maybe to examine the question. But they certainly were 50% more likely to die by suicide, and more than 4 times as likely to die by suicides that involved the use of firearms. In other words, they're living with someone who had a gun, made it 4 times as likely that you would die by suicide by gun, which means that the access to the gun implicates the rate of suicide. Now, I don't have the data to extrapolate here, But if that dynamic exists, if it is 4 times more likely that you will die by suicide if you're a woman in California, this is what the parameters of the study are, 4 times more likely you will die by suicide by living in California with a gun owner than if you don't have access to a gun in the home. Then you could extrapolate that if you didn't have easy access to a gun outside the home, it would be even less likely that you would commit suicide. These are all obvious dynamics, but there's increasingly more data to support it. To the extent that there isn't data, it is because the NRA and largely Republicans, some Democrats, but largely overwhelmingly Republicans, have prevented our government from keeping track on these things. That's why this data is in California, where they have a long history of gun control and a robust one. And so without the data, you can't make these proclamations. But you can extrapolate from these dynamics for something that is really common sense. I mean, if we all had access to grenades as easily as we had guns, is there any doubt that we would have mass grenade attacks where we would see mass deaths by grenades? I mean, is there any doubt? Does anybody have any doubt about that? If people could get grenades with the same ease in which they could get semi-automatic weapons, do people think that there wouldn't be an increase in death by grenade?
That's an arm, and we infringe upon people's right to have it, and it's good that we do that.
Yeah, I think so. It's hard to square. I mean, well-regulated militia. I mean, it's like, look, I know they didn't have grenades when they wrote those words in 1789, but guess what else they didn't have? Semi-automatic weapons. In fact, I think it's 1789. In fact, I'm sure of it. There was no multiple rounds.
Bullet was invented in, when was it? 1800s?
Yeah, I mean, no. You had bullets way before then, but it was single shots.
Right.
Stick that thing loaded up like you load up a cannon. So there's no consistency here. I mean, let's be honest. We should have access to grenades at the Dick's Sporting Goods store. And not just grenades. Any arms.
Javelins.
Javelin missiles. I mean, those are going to be expensive. They're going to be expensive.
FAA might be upset about that, but you know what? Freedom's freedom.
Freedom is freedom. And frankly, like, I don't think I could afford the top of the line tank, but maybe I don't care about gas mileage. I just want to be safe when I'm driving the highway.
Yep.
And makes traffic a little bit easier. Boom, out of the way. Cars coming towards me, stand my ground. Boom. But we'll put a link. Let's put a link to that study. I mean, to this piece too. It's in I think it was in Time. I think I saw Dave Roberts also tweeting out that study the other day or today or yesterday. I don't know when it was.